There we go. Okay, so let's see. This video is going to outline how to complete the essay outline. Pretty simple stuff, but it's kind of hard to understand unless I kind of walk you through it a little bit, especially if this is your first time kind of doing an essay outline, because not everybody does an outline. I mean, you definitely should. I do personally, but for whatever reason, some people are just okay just starting to write. But I want to make sure that I at least outline this skill before this assignment's due. That way. Even if it doesn't really help you very much, at least there's a lot to be gained from it if it does help you. So anyways, go ahead and click on this essay outline, and I'll kind of go through the directions with you. They're pretty simple, but basically what I've given you here is what I consider a traditional essay outline. If you go into any, as a matter of fact, let me go ahead and, well, I'll go over this real quick. So, complete this assignment, answer the following questions. Basically, you have 5 sections to this essay. Now, I'm not going to say that this is kind of a steadfast, definite structure that you have to follow. It's just my recommendation because this is how typically most research articles are structured. And I'm going to go back up here on the board behind me and outline that. But basically what I've done is I've suggested 5 sections. And if you want to change up these sections, that's fine. Just remember that the actual, I'm pulling out my syllabus here. Remember the actual point of this assignment. And I want to read that, verbatim so I don't go off task. But basically, the students produce an essay that described on the next page that discusses their findings with regard to their chosen theory. So let's go over that one. If I got the hard copy here, so if you got that, pull that up. But it's a field study essay. That's where I'm reading this from. So no matter what you do, as long as you complete these objectives, it doesn't really make any difference to me what your structure is. Now, if you decide to use a structure that's different from this assignment, then just basically kind of ask yourself the same types of questions that go along with that structure. It'll be kind of difficult, I imagine, if you try and basically make your own assignment here. So my suggestion is kind of go with this, but if you have other ideas, maybe email me and ask me what, well, first of all, describe to me what the section is you wanted to add or take away, and then, explain to me why. But anyways, beginning in week 8, which is where we are, students will use one of the theories covered in class as a lens through which to analyze their field study observations. So you guys went out, you've already chosen your lens or your theory, right? And that's basically puts a looking glass over your eye and says, this is how I'm going to, through this looking glass, is how I'm going to look at my observation. Everything that happened in that observation, I'm looking at it through this lens, right? Like drone goggles, only it's a particular lens that you're actually using. The essay consists of 4 to 5 pages, utilize 5 sources, which I have that video that outlines how to get your sources, how to create your works cited page. And we'll provide the following: a thesis, right? And so if you look over here, you have your thesis under the introduction. And if you've taken a class with me, this is going to look very familiar because this is essentially how I teach all of my writers to write. An English class with me, I mean. Let's see, where are we? A literature review of the chosen theory, so you will need this section. I mean, I suppose you could somehow structure it to maybe put that into the introduction if you wanted to, but it seems like it would be easier just to create it as its own section. An explanation of the organization, so basically tell me a little bit about the place you went to. In-depth description of the observation, so tell me where you went and tell me about that company, but then also tell me about your observation. Now there's another caveat here. Remember that you can't use I, me, and my, and I'm going to try and find some examples of how that looks. I know a lot of people are like, well, if it's my experience, how do I write without using I, me, or my, right? Basically, it's a case study, and you can talk about that. Really, you can use I, me, and my in certain contexts. Basically, if you're talking about a conversation, and other than that, you should really kind of stray away from using I, me, and my, but we'll talk about that later in the next week or so when we start writing the essay. An analysis using the chosen theory, so basically explain how the theory and then conclusions drawn from that interpretation. Basically, what does that mean? And so if you're here, this phenomenon, this is where you're describing your observation, and then the analysis is where you describe the observation from your theory. That's those last 2 points. Essay will adhere to proper MLA guidelines, which I kind of go over, well, I'll go over next week when you're actually formatting the essay, but I also kind of go over when I do the works cited page. The essay will also remain in third-person perspective, avoid using first or second-person pronouns, and the final draft is due in week 10. So those are kind of the outlines, well, the guidelines, I should say, for the essay. And so I'm going to blow up my screen real quick and kind of go over what I'm looking for here. And I want to go over what a research essay is typically going to look like. There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay, so typically, whenever you find a scholarly article, which I talked about in my last video with the sources, when you find these articles, they're going to consist of a couple sections. Most of the time, well, they're always going to have an introduction. So the very first part is always going to have an introduction. I'm not liking this pen. And in this introduction, they're basically going to explain the content. Now, typically, when you're doing research, this is some sort of problem. Like, why are you doing the research in the first place? Well, for you guys, you're doing it because I told you to. It's part of an assignment, which isn't really a problem per se, but you should still be able to explain the content as to what are you about to discuss. And if you have a problem or you can find a problem, then great, discuss that. Because chances are when you did your observation, you noticed some things based on the leadership. I mean, every day we go through life, right? And I personally, after emphasizing all the content in this class, I'm always out and I'm like, well, that could be better. Or that person could have approached that situation a little differently, especially working at college, right? Because I see how people interact with students, and I'm like, there's probably a better way for you to interact with that student, right? And so you may already have a problem kind of in your head, like you made this observation, and from learning in this class, you're like, that could have been, that could have turned out way better. And so you might start talking about there, but when I say content, you're going to have to kind of decide, because I know not everybody's going to have a problem per se that they observed, and that's perfectly fine. But then you have to kind of explain, well, if you're not talking about problem, what are you talking about? And so you might a little bit about the content as far as the problem goes. If you don't have a problem, maybe explain a little bit about why you're writing the essay. And remember, don't use I, me, and my. So there's a little challenge there, but that's just kind of the challenge that comes along already. Anyways. After that, remember, this is scholarly writing, not your essay, but I'm using the scholarly writing to explain how I derived the structure of the essay that you guys are writing and why I suggest that. So in a scholarly article, let me put that over here. And if you're not sure what I'm saying, it's scholarly, like a scholar, right? So the introduction, after that, typically you're going to have what's called a method section. And this is particularly the case in psychology, sociology, the social sciences type, because they have to explain how they went about conducting this this study. And a lot of times it'll be like control group. I've had, like, for instance, I'm doing a study right now where I'm looking at how a particular class, a type of class, impacts a student's retention. What that means is that the fact that they are there in the class and then come back a year later. I found a particular class that's increased that by 25%, and so what I did is I went out and I had two groups, right? I had the control group, which was just Math 131, college algebra if you don't remember, or Math 137, which is called math modeling. Well, we have this treatment that I'm calling it. Imagine like a pill that I give everybody, but in this case the pill was a particular teacher. And so I looked at the control group, and I looked at the, they were all taking Math 131, 137. These guys were also taking Math 131, 137, but I'm looking at how the instructor increased the retention in this treatment group, right? And so that would be my methods. And so you explain those types of things here. Basically, how the researcher gathered and analyzed their data. That's really all the methods section kind of amounts to. After you get that, then you come up with a results section. Oh, you know what? I missed a piece. There, sorry, up here, there's actually a literature review. So I'm going to pause this and rewrite it. But I'm going to rewrite the methods and results, but I'm also going to give myself some space to write in literature review. Okay, so down here, the methods. Now, the literature review is actually number 2. And in the literature review, typically when you read these scholarly articles, they're going to give you a background of the content. So if I was looking at it, and if it was my study about the retention thing, I would explain how retention basically kind of sucks for all colleges, right? Nobody, the retention rate is actually 50-50. So one out of every 2 students doesn't come back a year later. And so that's from fall to fall. So this fall, we're in fall right now, right? Well, almost like summer, but basically fall. And so that means that 50% of the people watching this video are not going to be here a year from now. And I think it's actually like 54% are going to come back, and 46% won't. But still, it's basically 50-50. And so that would be my literature review would explain the background of that. It would explain how maybe retention used to be good whenever the economy had the recession, right? Because every time we're got an economy down, everybody goes back to school because they want to get their grades, they want to get a degree. That way they can qualify for other jobs and make more money. But when the economy is doing okay or doing well, then retention and enrollment in colleges go down. It kind of makes sense, but I mean that's a theory. Nobody can say for sure. But that's what my literature review would do. It would discuss how the trends in enrollment have changed from way back when to now. And that literature review would basically give a background. And then the results after we go through the methods. So give a background on the topic and then explain how you gathered the data for this topic. And then the results are basically what you find. This is where all the numbers are going to be. And so if you're not a numbers person, I highly recommend not reading this section. I mean, I know that's not something that I should be telling you as like a researcher and and a writing teacher, an English teacher, right? But it's just so complicated, the results section, because they plug these things into this program and it runs these formulas. And without getting too in-depth to it, there's all these different statistical analyses, right, that you can do. And really the number you got to figure out is, remember, is 0.05. If anything, if they give you results and it's above 0.05, that means it wasn't significant. That means that, basically the treatment didn't work. It could have worked. It could have been 0.06, which means 94% of all the cases that you looked at were cured by the treatment, right? But we need 95. That's kind of the gold standard for research. But see, that's what I'm talking about. It gets kind of complicated, so I don't want to talk too much about that. But basically, the data is presented. That's really what the results section is for. And so then the next section, now this is the section that I would read. This is called the discussion. And this is where the author, the researcher, is actually going to go back and tell you the results and tell you what the results meant to him or her. And so in this section, I would give you all the numbers and I would be like, oh, the chi-square test resulted in a 0.043, and so that suggests that 96% or whatever are likely to be impacted if you apply this to the whole population. And you're like, what does that mean? Well, the discussion, that's where you explain that. And so it would basically be something like, according to the results from the study, it can be assumed that the treatment class will increase retention rates by 25%, or the pill that we gave these students will cure cancer 98% of the time. It'll basically be the interpretation, and it'll explain it to you a little easier than these results sections will. So it's the author's interpretation. Now, I highly recommend you read this section. This is going to be my star, because if you don't read anything else in the article, I highly recommend you read this, because this is where you're going to be able to find a lot of your cited material. Because if you come down here and they say, using cell phones increases intelligence by 4 points every year, something, that's BS, I made that up. But if they say that, you could cite that in your essay and say, hey, you know what, cell phones, even though they have this bad rap, that they are actually beneficial for a lot of things. And I don't think anybody would argue that, but you have a citation now. And as you probably remember from the citation part of the video, my last video, that if you don't have a citation to back up your claims, you kind of have a bad argument. I'm not focused too much on plagiarism as much as I am on how well your argument's constructed. Because if you come up with an argument, I remember I had a student 2 semesters ago, and I'm actually talking about this semester in my English class. We're talking a lot about how this person wrote this essay, and they said that shotgun weddings originated in the 1800s. And so in my immediate mind, I was like, I don't think that's right. But they didn't have a citation. And so I thought they were making it up, and it turns out they were. But point being, if they had a citation there, they'd be able to back up that claim, and I can't just be like, that author doesn't know what they're talking about. Because once the reader kind of says that about your article, and they think that you don't know what you're talking about, well, they have no reason to read the rest of the article because they basically think the rest of your article is BS, right? And so you want to make sure you form good arguments by using citations, and that's where you're going to get these citations from here. Now after that, you're going to have the conclusion, and that conclusion is just going to be a summary of all the main points. You can see that? Oh yeah, nice. Summary of all main points. So that is basically the structure of a scholarly article. Now, why did I tell you that? Because basically you're writing the same thing. Because remember, you are doing a research here. You're doing a case study of a particular organization, and you're looking at it in light of that theory. Now, I'm not having you do the results section, mainly because what you're doing is what's called a qualitative study. It's a qualitative case study. And qualitative isn't going to have like a bunch of numbers. It's basically going to have kind of themes that you have, but we're not going to go into that so in depth because you could have a whole class based on qualitative research methods, right? And that's not what this class is. Instead, what I've done is I've taken out the results, and your methods section is actually just the phenomenon section. It's you describing. Sorry, big van's pulling up outside my window. I thought I was going to get some candy or something. I replaced this with basically the phenomenon section. And that's you basically telling me how you got that. Because in here it says like give some context for your observation, what main points stand out to you. That's essentially telling us how you got the data, right? Because the next section you're going to analyze it. Well, you're analyzing your experience. Your experience is the phenomenon, and your phenomenon is your method for gathering the data, right? So that's why we call it phenomenon. Now we have a literature review of the phenomenon, and then the discussion. The discussion is essentially your analysis section. So I'm going to take this away. And that's where you give the author your interpretation, right? That's where you explain how the theory kind of is how the phenomenon is explained in light of this particular theory. Because if you look at your scenario through, say, self-determination theory, it's going to be a lot different than if you look at it through, say, the Fourth Habit of Covey's book. So, completely different things, but it's going to help change the perspective of for your perspective of the phenomenon. So anyways, this is how I suggest you structure the essay. Now if you change your sections, you'll have to email me and ask, first of all, tell me what you're going to replace the section with, and then I'll kind of tell you what I want you to describe for this assignment. But anyways, that's really all that I have for this week. The only other assignment, I'm going to pull this back up. The only, there we go. The only other assignment that we have is the, let's see, I think it was the reflection paper, number 3. Yes, so the self-reflection number 3, that was the essay outline. And so this week I'm going to be getting it on grades. Obviously I haven't done that very well lately because, well, I went to Mexico and then I got food poisoning. So imagine that. That's why I'm actually recording the video the day that things get posted. So that's why the videos are late. And that's why I haven't gotten any grading done. So anyways, I will get that done this week, or at least a good hefty chunk of it. And my priority is going to be your research paper number 2, like that the reflection paper, that second one you guys wrote a couple weeks ago. That's going to be my focus because that's where I give you a lot of your feedback, and that feedback for the second and third paper are what you're going to use to write your essay for the field study. So anyways, go ahead and work on these assignments this week. Email me with any questions, and yeah, I think everything's been going well because I haven't had many texts or emails lately, so that's good. Anyways, let me know if you need anything via text, email, phone call, and I will get back to you ASAP. Have a good week.